Hey everybody, welcome into $1 Million Domains for Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022, or as I like to call it, 32322. Sounds like a locker room combination. I guess I'm not dating myself to think back when we first moved into the decade of the 2000s, which I believe started in the year 2001, but that's a whole different story. And now we're in 22. Holy cow, almost a quarter of the way through the century. It's crazy. And we're still buying and selling domain names the same way we were at the turn of the century. We're still buying and selling $1 million domain names the same way that we were at the turn of the century in the year 2000. Every once in a while, although it's happening much more frequently, we'll hear about a private sale. Different brokers will announce that they've sold names for millions of dollars. And some great researchers in the domain industry will search 10K SEC reports, press releases, and other data to dig up $1 million domain sales. Now, things have gotten a little better. We used to use escrow.com, and now we have escrow.com and we have dan.com. Marketplaces are the same, Saydo and Afternic. We have some new marketplaces like Squad Help and Brand Bucket, and I think they've done, for sure, hundreds of thousands of dollars, names priced at hundreds of thousands of dollars, and maybe even $1 million domain. But in general, after 20 years, we're buying and selling $1 million domain names the same way we were 20 years ago. Yet, in my opinion, somehow we're still optimistic that the market's going to grow and these names are going to be worth more in the future. Business.com sold for $10 million in 1999. Business.com could sell for $10 million today. But I think the biggest change that's happened in the last 20 years has happened in the last 3, which is brandable single word domain names. Where some people had the vision back in 2000 to think that they should be worth $1 million. It's really been the last 3 years where we've seen one word English dictionary words become worth millions of dollars in .com. So anyway, welcome into $1 Million Domains. I'll let everybody get seated here. Let me invite a few more people. I've posted a link for some of the notes on today's show, and I use a WordPress.com site, so somehow that's what it's showing up as. Let me click it and see if the link actually worked. Let's see. Nope. All right. Let's see. Let me fix my link. Let me fix my link. Boy, speaking of some things that never change, I just got an inquiry on a name, socialbroker.com. I haven't owned this name for 15 years, and I had it parked on the Traffic Z parking system way back then. And somehow that inquiry page is still alive, and I still get offers to buy this name. That's crazy. All right, let me see if I can fix this link. My name is Paige Howe. I host talks here on Domain Club. We're the largest club on Clubhouse. On the Wednesday show, we talk about $1 million and high-value domain names. whether it's names you think are worth $1 million or in this case, multiple millions of dollars. And it's a different combination than names you might get to run a small business, to use for your email, to use for a small startup. It's different than names that you might get specifically tied to your own business. If I had PageHow domain store, I would like that domain name. I would think it was worth money, but it wouldn't really have money, a lot of value in the marketplace, much less millions of dollars. There's 150 million .com domains out there, and what we're talking about are the top 1% of the top 1% of the top 1%. Trying to currently figure out how many $1 million domains I think exist out there. But say it's 50,000. I think that they're probably being purchased at some rate, whether it's 10 a month or 20 a month. I think that there's an adequate supply right now of $1 million domain names from investors who have held these names for 25 to 30 years. They have a very small cost in the names. And each of these $1 million domain names, if you haven't borrowed against them, only has a renewal cost of $9. So you have a situation where people can hold $1 million assets almost indefinitely, waiting for the right price. Now, you may say they're losing out on the cost of what they could do with the money if they sold the name, but they're not in a situation where they're compelled to sell. They can decide that they would rather get their ultimate price than sell for less than their ultimate price and try to put the money to work in other investments. There's still a lot of inventory held by these original holders. Most of them have had to say no to prices of 100,000 and 300,000 and 600,000 and $1.2 million and $1.5 million and $1.8 million. Buyers may think that they should sell for less, but they really do feel like they know what they have and they know what they want to sell it for. A lot of these sellers might only sell 2 or 3 domain names a year. Big companies have $1 million domain names. There's been a lot of mergers and acquisitions through the internet bubble, the second internet bubble, Web 2, the financial crisis, Web 3, SPACs, companies going public, companies acquiring other companies, venture capital, private equity. You get a lot of names that are just owned by companies. They're not sure what they want to do them offensively, but they know they're not going to give them away. And it's almost, it's not just money that brings about them selling, is that someone in the company is going to have to make a decision. And if you're trying to buy a name from a company who owns a high value name, you need to understand that the first thing they don't want to do is make a mistake. So if you're thinking, hey, maybe I can talk them into thinking it's not worth that much, they would probably just say no rather than wondering if someone's going to look back and say, if you take the name and start a great company, wow, they started the great company with a domain name they bought from United Airlines for $300,000. And someone's going to look back and say, who the heck sold travel.com for $300,000 or something like that? But that inventory, I think, is coming available. I think the introduction of the new TLDs in the last 5 to 7 years has at least increased the supply of domain names, even if that supply is maybe not competitive with one-word domain names. It's increased the choices and the options, as have the new decentralized namespaces. Maybe that's enough to create some ambiguity, to pry these names out of old companies. And then you've got probably the source of domain names that's most ripe, in my opinion, for turnover in the next 5 years, which is you have companies that might be operating on a domain name and underutilizing it. They may have owned it because their president or their CEO got in early and got a good one-word domain name. They may be running a hundreds of thousands or $1 million business. And they might be able to do that with any number of domain names if they don't have global aspirations. if they don't want to grow and grow and grow. And they may find at today's prices that $1 million or $1.5 million or $3 million is enough for them to rebrand, to maybe take a step down to a lesser domain name. We always talk about companies stepping up to a better domain name, but some companies might step down to a lower domain name, pocketing what they may see as the value of a non-core asset to give them the money to reinvest in their business. But two of the things that happened as we review the news of the week and $1 million domain names I thought I'd talk about up front was we had a non-ICANN, non-IANA root, decentralized blockchain domain sell last week for $750,000, which does not put it in the $1 million club, but it puts it darn close. And the string, the reason I'm going to call it a string is it's more than just a domain name. It's a string in the HNS, or the handshake domain name system. And Namecheap, the registrar, and I don't know whether that was the entity that did it or whether it was their CEO, bid $750,000 at a public auction for S. And when you think about a handshake domain name, I think it's important, even though I'm very sanguine on the ultimate prospects, there's certainly trading profits to be made because of the attention given in handshake. But I think the thing to remember where handshake, I think, is quite a bit different than unstoppable domain names and ENS domain names. The one thing I will give handshake is they're really selling you the top level domain name, like something that could be com, net, or org, or horse, or luxury, that you might be able to build a registry off of. So, as Andrew Alleman talked about when he talked about .s, the owner of S could operate a registry when and if there is more universal acceptance of the handshake system, and be able to sell subdomain names like friend.s, which would look like friends, and baseballcard.s, which would look like baseball cards, and maybe page.s, which would look like pages. Now, whether that S, whether the symbol before the S is a slash or a dot, it looks like they're following the same format and making it a dot. I own a HNS string .nom, and I've sold third level domain names where people can buy, USA.nom or travel.nom, and that's what was appealing to me, was not only like with Unstoppable could I own page.crypto, but I could own, Unstoppable owns .crypto, and they get to sell all the domain names underneath .crypto. But with Handshake, you had the opportunity to buy a name that you could build a registry on. Now, most of the trading in Handshake names, I believe, people are just buying and selling them as the single domain name, almost like what's called a dotless domain name, where if I bought page, I could just somehow envision my web presence would be page, that my wallet address would be page, not necessarily thinking that I would have to create my.page or hi.page or all these other ones. And I think people are just reaching to buy something to own it. But I think they see a HNS string as a single property. But if you think about the $750,000 paid for .s, and if you think that you're going to charge $20 a year, then if you sell 1,000 subdomains each year, that's 1,000 times 20, that's 20,000 a year. So say you sell 10,000 .s subdomains, that's 200,000 a year. And you can start to see how investing 750,000, adding a registry technology, and if you can market it, sell $200,000 a year or more worth of domains, all of a sudden makes that investment look a lot differently than a speculative buy of a single asset. It's like you're buying the cow that produces milk every day, and more importantly, when you launch, they could tomorrow be selling a huge number of third level domain names under .s. Now, because I never want to present an overly optimistic picture of these new strings, just like when the new TLDs came out, everyone is trying to apply principles of scarcity, which we see in .com, to these new spaces that by their very nature are unscarce. When the new TLDs came out and they said we're all going to be just as good as .com, and you had .site and .website and .club and .horse and .yokohama, and you had everything, I think they all thought, well, there's going to be .com and there's going to be us. But I don't think what they realized was the competition was going to come from all the other strings. Do you want to be a .guru or a .coach or a .expert? You have a lot of competition there. And if you think about H&S, they've created an unlimited supply of new top level domain extensions, and they're still trying to get scarcity pricing as if they were rare. But there's an unlimited supply of names and combinations of names and numbers. And it's true the best ones, like a single letter or a single number, should be scarce. But if you think about it, it kind of gets them right back into the same situation we're in with .com domain names, which are there's 150 million .com domain names. Some of the best cost $1 to $10 to $20 to $40 million. But I will say your investment in an existing .com domain name gives you something that works on all the existing internet backbone and infrastructure. It does have a history, for whatever you think about ICANN, of having policies and procedures around it in what I like to call a hybrid structure. A lot of the processes to own and transfer a domain name in the ICANN IANA structure are similar to blockchain in that they happen automatically. If you have an authorization code and you submit it at the right time in the right place, you can accomplish the transfer of ownership of a domain name from one registrar to another. But the reason I call the existing system a hybrid is there are still protections for mistakes and errors and fraud and nefarious activity when names are stolen. And as good as a decentralized system might be, many times a transaction that happens in a decentralized system is locked. And even though it can be tracked and traced, it can't always be identified with a person, much less a person or a company in a jurisdiction, much less a person or a company in a jurisdiction where you could identify assets if you were victimized. And I think for most of us, if you're using a domain name in your business or as your email address, or it's the name of your company, or it's how you do your marketing, or it's how you deliver your product, or it's how every aspect of your business that relies on the internet, that's how you own it. That's how Amazon owns Amazon.com. They own every part of the transaction that they accomplish through different things that happen on Amazon.com, different resources on Amazon.com. They can interact with any other company in the world, except if you're in China or Iran, that has a .com address, and know that there's instant compatibility. If you think of the amount of business development that's been saved over the years by the fact that I can start a website and any other website in the world can link to a product or service on my website, and I can pull a resource or an image or a file or a piece of content from any other unlocked or unprotected website on the internet. Imagine before, when if you had old internet systems like CompuServe and Pathfinder and AOL, and every time you wanted to get access to someone's platform, you had to strike some type of joint venture deal. So when you think about these H&S domain names, because I mentioned the $750,000 sale of .s, they're painting a picture of what could be different in the future. And if the future happens the way they're thinking, and if they develop market power in that future, then someone owning the rights to that single letter string, it could be, extraordinarily valuable. But what you have now is much more just the potential of something in the future. Now, the attributes that would make someone pay $750,000 for a single letter, in my opinion, are one, once one person pays that much, the next ones are going to cost more. Two, ICANN seems to have committed to never issuing one character domain names. So there's a chance that you're never going to be in competition with an ICANN TLD also named .s. So if you picture a world where the ICANN TLDs and the decentralized ones are going to coexist, it is a measured bet that has reduced some of the risk of competition with ICANN, that ICANN will probably never have a single character. Now, ICANN has some really good reasons for never having single characters. It's going to be very hard for a lot of machines to parse a .s domain name from someone simply having a period at the end of a sentence, not putting a space before the beginning of the next sentence, and having someone realize that that's a domain name. And for a lot of you that invested in new TLDs, you notice that sometimes you'll text and it'll turn your text into a domain name because it happens to be the string of different TLDs. Anyway, there's lots going on, but I thought I'd mention that. Almost $1 million paid for a decentralized domain name. That's part of the news of the week. All right. Now I got to find out why my link doesn't work. Let's see. See if someone can hold the baton for a second. There's a question in the chat, but that question is much more skewed for Monday domains than $1 million domains. Let's see. I do have a couple hands raised, but all right. Just going to hold for a second here while I try to pin this link. All right. Edit pinned link. I'm just going to put milliondollardomains.com. Isn't this great? I can put one link in one platform and everybody can see it no matter what device they're on, no matter where they are in the world. Let's see if that's better. If anybody can back channel me if you can see that link, I would appreciate it. All right, let's talk about $1 million domains. Thank you for being patient last week. For some reason, I couldn't get Facebook to turn on last week. So I was ready. The team was ready. The resources were ready. And we just couldn't get it going. But I've got a lot of the content. So what I wanted to share with you, if you go to $1 million domain names, I put a thing with my links and mentions. And what I'm trying to do is collect different things from all the various blogs in our industry, which are terrific. And I try to give good attribution and notification to each blog that comes up with this content. And I would encourage you to follow each blog so you find out about this content as soon as possible. You may be in the middle of a negotiation where knowing a different story or knowing about a different keyword or knowing about a different company may allow you to sell a domain name for more money. It may be the little thing that puts you over the top in a multi-million-dollar negotiation to be able to say, this is what just happened today, or this is the type of use that a company has found for $1 million domain name. And based upon that, we may be reconsidering our price. And so I think it's important to stay updated. And so Elliot does a great job at domaininvesting.com, and he posted a video from venture.com. And it's a testimonial from Shrey Ganeshram. I hope I'm saying that right. And they bought the domain name awning.com. When I say they bought it, they acquired it. I'll say that from Venture. And he does a really well-produced testimonial of how they were able to buy the domain name, how it was an easy process. Now, what venture.com does is they take their domain names that have $1 million or multi-million-dollar valuations, and their theory is, why sell the golden goose when you can receive income from the golden goose for life? And so they do two things. They make the domain name attractive to start working with for the beginning of your company. So awning was able to take a word that you might say is a very small niche market relating to houses. But if you take this new trend of $1 million domain names, of taking a single word and thinking about not the product name or the literal name of awning, but what's the role and the function of an awning? What does it do? And you start to be able to align the attributes of your company with the word in a way that people can take a word that they're familiar with and then instantly apply it to your company. And if you think about where companies had to go the last 10 years to invest in made up names like Awnable, or My Awning, or Awning with 3 G's, the ability to have it be a word that is known, remembered, and especially will work on any voice to text applications or any voice internet of things applications. What Venture does is they allow you to get into a name like that for maybe thousands of dollars per month. Now, you may never own awning.com. You may always be paying a lease rate to Venture. Or I don't know if in some cases they allow you to buy it out. But if you think about it, what does ownership really mean? And I had this described to me early in my career. I worked with a group that was a financial planning group. And we talked about, what does ownership really mean with our clients? And we decided that it meant you receive the benefits, the rents of owning it. In this case, you're able to use it for your property. And you get to decide who gets it in the future. You get to legacy it or decide which company or entity controls it. So even though they're going to lease this domain name awning.com, they're going to be able to get the economic rents, the benefits of being awning.com right away. And they're going to be able to, as long as they keep paying their annual lease payment, control who is awning.com and what happens when anyone goes to the awning.com website. And they can, depending on the agreement, sell that on to another company. It can be acquired. So they've got a lot of the attributes of ownership. And maybe instead of having to make a $1 or $2 or $3 million capital decision, they're matching the expense with when they're receiving the benefits. And as a startup, Venture usually allows companies to make a lower lease payment at the beginning. But what's important is they can start with their branding from day one instead of having to change later from being myawning.com and then saying now we're awning.com. And it allows them to take the capital they have at the beginning and use it to either be a cushion in case of ups and downs, can maybe let them spend more time on acquiring the right people or the right technology or marketing or advertising. But I thought it was interesting when you talk about $1 million domain names to hear someone talking about the process And I think it's something that you can use. You could use this link when people are talking about a startup, acquiring a $1 million domain name, and you can talk about the fact that they can buy it or lease it. Let's see. Next article I want to talk about is, this is a really good one. If you saw this link, it was on Name Pros. It was on Elliot mentioned it. It was actually done in a podcast that was related to Startup.club. So I know Colin was aware of it when we talked last weekend. And the link that I've put is to the Name Pros post, which takes you right to this podcast with Jason Calacanis. And Jason Calacanis is an entrepreneur and angel investor, but I think he's kind of one of our crossover heroes, for lack of a better word. He's someone who has some roots in the domain space, understands about domain names from early on back in the turn of the century in the 2000s, and has gone on to be a public figure. He's a CNC contributor for a number of years. He's formed and run companies, and now he does a podcast. But if you listen to him, who has talked about domain names for so long, what he says casually is very interesting. He's just kind of talking about this company, love.com, who just acquired a domain name, and he speculates they must have paid $5 million or 5 or 10 million. And he bases that because he used to help, it was either AOL or Yahoo, which are now combined, sell off some of their domain names. And they had a chance to sell games.com, and they asked him as kind of the inside expert. He said, let's sell it for 10 million. And I think even though he's doing it casually, behind that is quite a bit of experience and thought into the fact that, yes, these one-word domain names are worth this. And you've got kind of a public figure saying it with very little qualification or regard in this podcast. So one, we have another sale of love.com, which I don't think we're ever going to be able to talk about a price for. But I think it's another example of an incredible keyword that's now owned by a new company. It's off the market for anyone else that wants it. And the next time someone needs to buy a name similar to it, you're going to have people, saying, we think this transaction was this much money, so we're going to want at least this for ours. Let's see, I put a link in there to George Karakos, who does some great work. And he found out that in 2004, the domain name creditcards.com was acquired for $2.75 million. But what was interesting is when he went through and looked at the other public documents, because when you sell a company, if you're a public company, you have to provide all the information about your company in public documents. So a public company has to have all their information given fairly to all public shareholders. And even though they can hold it confidential, maybe till they file a quarterly report, they've got to say it at one time. What was interesting was even back in 2004, he references in their documents that they had obtained a third-party valuation for the domain name of $53 million. So when I talk about the inconsistency and the uncertainty and the confusion of the market for domain names, and the inconsistency and the confusion of what domain names are worth, I think all that benefit has been going to the buyers. Because here you have a case where the word appraisal, if you think, what would a willing seller and a willing buyer agree on in terms of value? You have a third-party appraisal of $55 or $53 million, and the transaction was $2.75 million. To somehow account for the fact that people just weren't sure. A buyer just wasn't sure. I can't pay that full appraisal. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know it. And a lot of the growth in the value of domain names, big one-word domain names, has simply been a slow reduction in the uncertainties as to whether these domain names are really worth what I think are the tens of millions of dollars that they're worth, even though people have been able to acquire them for 1 to 2 to 5 to 8 million. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Let's see, the next link. Elliot has another great article, which is a Q&A with Carl Hancock, and he was the recent purchaser of gravity.com. And they announced it on their Twitter page on March 8th. And Elliot, as he does, for the good of the industry, he reached out to the founder to ask him. And he wasn't able to share a lot of details, but Elliot did a great job of saying, he asked Carl, this is on domaininvesting.com. You got the link there to read about it and follow Elliot's blog. It says, I asked Carl if he could share why he felt it was important for his company to secure the domain name. And this is what the founder said. We spent the last 13 years building Gravity Forms as a brand, and within our niche, people commonly referred to us as Gravity when talking about our product. And you can imagine that. Hey, you got the Gravity for that? Send that to Gravity. Use our Gravity. Put that on Gravity. Can you Gravity that? He goes, I never thought the opportunity to acquire the domain name would ever actually happen. But when it presented itself, we had to jump on it because it was a no-brainer from a branding and marketing standpoint. If we didn't acquire it, someone else would have, and the likelihood that it would have truly be gone forever would have been the likely scenario, so it was now or never. Then he says, can't wait to put it to use building the next 13 years of our business. So now he's able to grow from being a forms company into a robust data management platform. The name had been owned by Yahoo and Verizon and different companies like AOL. There's no idea what the price was. But if you think about what this company CEO is saying without hesitation, without equivocation, the opportunity was available and we had to take it. I think you can use something like this when you're talking about domain transactions. If you think it's the best thing for your company to do to buy a domain name for your company and you're having trouble getting other people in the company to get on board with this, I think it's good to have other testimonials from other company founders to be able to share that information with. I think if you're wondering yourself, do people really think this? Is this just something Page talks about, $1 million domain names? Or do founders really think it makes sense to have the one-word domain name that best describes their company or product? And I think you've got these type of resources to go to and to quote. Let's see. James Isles reported on Fixer.com. They paid around $100,000 for the domain name. Mojo.com, a serial entrepreneur, Mark Lohr, latest startup launches on Mojo.com. It's the man behind, this is from Andrew Oliver on Domain Name Wire. Man behind Diapers and Jet acquires Mojo.com for his latest startup. So now you've got someone who sold their company to Amazon for $545 million. Then they went back, did another venture, acquired Jet.com from Gary Chernoff's Net Income Ventures. Sold that to Walmart for $3.3 billion. Now he's coming back from a third startup. And you would have to say, if you were in a courtroom, Judge, that a serial entrepreneur who keeps repeating the same playbook, there must be something to the playbook of getting a great short one-word domain name, still having to build a good company, still having to have good technology, still having to have good relationships and partners. But he's starting at Mojo.com and he's going right back to a short, easily recognizable, prestigious domain name. And I think that's what's happening out there. Now, the information in the business and startup community is so disjointed that there's no way to just tell everybody at one time, this is what companies are doing. Most companies will probably only realize this looking back. And looking back, they'll realize that right now in 2022, they may still have had a chance to buy their perfect domain name. but I do think a lot of them are going off the market. Let's see, I'll finish up here a little quickly. NFT.com launched. Thank you, Andrew Alleman, Domain Name Wire. Greenhouse.com. James Isles reports on James' name. Greenhouse software upgrades to Greenhouse.com thanks to Sadhu. Founded in 2012, Greenhouse has raised $111 million. They've got a valuation of $820 million. Greenhouse had been sold in 2007 for $500,000. It may have been under contract with Uber broker Media Options on the DNX.com marketplace. And then it looks like it was transferred to a Sadhu holding account, meaning they probably helped facilitate this transfer. So you have a company worth almost $1 billion. And one of the things they're doing with their hard-earned money is moving up from being Greenhouse Capital to Greenhouse.com. And just think, when you apply that to the whole world, to all the companies that are going to be upgrading, and now any other company that's Greenhouse Advisors, Greenhouse Holdings, Greenhouse, an environmental company, they won't be able to be Greenhouse. They're going to have to be My Greenhouse or Greenhouse LLC or Greenhouse.expert or Greenhouse.eco. But they're not going to be able to be Greenhouse.com, the best domain name. And the reason that being the best, I think, is so important when I think about $1 million domain names is when you're second best or third best or fourth best or fifth best, it's easier to figure out how much less you are than the top company. But when you're the top name that's possible, and there's nothing to compare you against, if you're Greenhouse.com, maybe you could say green.com, but in this case, it doesn't make sense because the company's called Greenhouse. You can't really calculate. It's like if you say Tom Brady's the greatest quarterback of all time. Well, how much better than everyone else is he? You don't know. He's not competing against anyone anymore. He's in a class of its own. He's in a world of its own. So by buying the best .com domain name, the reason I'm so passionate about domain names and about the industry is whether you're buying $1 million domain name for a huge company or whether you're buying the perfect domain name for your local business or your local marketing company, you're putting yourself in the range where there's nothing to compare you against. You're simply the best named company. And you got to remember, a domain name is your brand and it's your address. You get the functional benefits of a short and easy to remember address and the branding benefits of someone instantly elevating you because of the prestige you get from having the best domain name. You're not second best. You're not third best. You're not constantly having them think, oh yeah, that company's got the 9th best domain name. Hey, I'm so happy I'm doing business with the number 9 company. So I think that that's the thing that's always going to be appealing for these one-word domain names. Let's see, I got one more. Oh, so anyway, the other thing I wanted to do is I looked at names that had been recently listed on Dan. And you can use some of the publicly available data services. And so I just went through and I put some links of name and price, and then I put the number of extensions that the string was registered in, just to see what's coming up for sale. Now, this isn't a bargain basement bin. This is people that want the great price for their domain names. But I think where the opportunity exists, and what I hope to highlight on $1 million domain names as the years go by, is that for companies in these businesses, for companies that can use these names to generate tens of thousands of dollars of revenue each month, right now these names are being priced by many times domain investors who are just picking a price or imagining a price. So I even look at a company like Prime Digital, a domain name like Prime Digital, $35,000. Now, most wholesale domain investors would want to pay about $1,000 for this name, maybe $2,000. And then you buy it and then you put it up for $35,000. But if you had a company and you wanted to, and your company's called Prime Digital, or you wanted a great name to name a company, you could do a lot worse than Prime Digital. Saw an interesting name for 3,000, reanimator.com. Saw an interesting name for 18,000, winetaster.com. And whether that's one word or whether that's two word, I mean, there's bottles of wine that cost $18,000, and you can be winetaster.com for 18,000 euros. Blockchain school for $13,000. Blockchain is big. If you're a blockchain developer, you can make a lot of money. Go to blockchain school, or it could be a school running on the blockchain. Then I saw soccer shoes, and I put it on here for 1.1 million. And a couple people that looked at this list last week commented on it. But Richard, who's been with us from the beginning at local search marketing, he says that rings a bell. So I noted it. He says, wasn't there a shoe name that sold for $700,000? And I looked it up, and there was. In 2011, running shoes sold for $700,000. And again, if you think back to the .s that I talked about at the beginning, where you take the $1 million purchase price and you say, how many domain names do I have to sell a year? Well, think about if you're a shoe company and you're runningshoes.com, and they paid $700,000, and say their margins are $20 a shoe. So you've got to sell, 3,500 pairs, 300 pairs of shoes a month, more than you would if you weren't runningshoes.com. And all of a sudden you're paying for the name, and anything better than you do is all profit. So I think when I talk about the fact that the value of domain names is uncertain and we're just picking prices out of the air, it's because we really are as a seller, because we're not going to get in the running shoes business. Anyway, the other one I saw, everyone's talking about XYZ these days. And I saw money.xyz for $69,000. And if you look at some of the XYZs that are selling for a lot less, or for in the tens of thousands of dollars, I looked at money.com or money.xyz, and I thought money as a string might be in the top 50 strings that exist. And I think the idea of $1 million domain names says I'm going to buy bigger names. You're going to invest in bigger names, because when you're right, could money.xyz be $1 million domain name? The Web3 community seems very interested in money. They seem very interested in trading money. Now, it's not cheap. This isn't bargain day. You know what I mean? This is $69,000. I have no interest in this name. I have no relationship. I haven't got my affiliate links working, although I probably will at some point in time with Dan. But anyway, at $69,000, could that be a 5-to-1 or an 8-to-1? I even looked at it as a syndication candidate. Could I take money.xyz and sell 60 shares at $1,000? I would probably take a 25% override as the general partner, do some incremental build out to at least establish the brand, and be in a position where a new entrant that wanted to potentially take on crypto.com might be able to do it with money.xyz. Now you say, oh, they wouldn't do it, whatever, but they could. So I think that's the different mindset that you need to come with when you're talking about $1 million domain names, is that it's not about buying names at a discount. It's about trying to determine just how much upside exists when you're talking about having the best domain name in some small class. And it's really hard for us, and Bhavin, I always say his name wrong, Bhavin Turakaya, talked about this on Startup Club on Friday. He said, entrepreneurs seem very good at picturing what can be done in a year. But he made the comment after being involved with a lot of startups that entrepreneurs maybe also are really good at what it takes to make something worth $1 million. But it's going from $1 million to 10 million, or 10 million to 100 million, or it's taking a company from year 2 to year 10, and how much possible growth exists at these huge levels, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, that for some reason he's found it's hard for us to get our entrepreneurial mind around the middle and late stage growth that happens in big companies and seeing that at the beginning. Now, there's a lot of domainers that don't have this problem. They buy a domain name and they pay $1,000 for it, and they make a case why it's worth $20 million. In fact, $20 million is too cheap. It's really worth $50 million. You know what? It's really worth $100 million. So I'm not saying everyone has this problem, but I thought it was interesting. So I put money.xyz on the list just to talk about it a little bit. And then I put one more on there. Oh, when you think about the new TLDs, one of the most registered strings that exist is BTC. I think it's taken in over 650 extensions. And I have no idea what SRL is. But if you somehow think that that you want to own things that are registered in a lot of extensions, there are a lot of extensions out there that you can possibly buy. So if there was a value play on the list, it would probably be that one. Anyway, that is my show for today. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you. Follow our club in Clubhouse. If you've been part of the studio audience, I appreciate you listening through it. I'd love to hear your comments. We may start using some of them in our testimonials. We won't put your name on there. We might just put your initials. So any comments you can send me in the back channel. I've appreciated those who have shared with me, that they like the show, and it does, it does help. If you're listening to this on the podcast, you may want to consider joining Clubhouse, getting the Clubhouse app, being part of our family here at Domain Club, coming up on stage. If you've got $1 million domain name that you're shaping, or you're staging, or you're selling, or you're looking to buy, or you want to talk about it with other $1 million domain investors, that's what we'll do more as the year goes on. But that is the show today. Let's see what's been going on in the chat. I do want to focus the chat on $1 million names. Mike Gaffney's breaking some news. DN Academy acquired by GoDaddy. Fantastic. Congratulations to both. I'm assuming that's what Mike means by that. I know that they've used DN Academy for a lot of their people along the way. There we go. Kevin's got it too. GoDaddy bought DN Academy. Fantastic. Congratulations to both. That'll be terrific. All right. Well, if anyone has any questions about $1 million domain names, I can take a couple. And if not, we'll probably wrap up about 5 minutes early today. So thanks, everybody. Join us every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern for $1 million domain names here on Domain Club. I let Jeff up, but anyway, thanks for those of you that shared your thoughts. All righty. Well, good luck, everybody. We'll see you next week.